All right, so welcome everyone to another fabulous live stream. It is a beautiful day here in Vancouver. I'm visiting Vancouver for the summer, and I am taking full advantage of the weather these days. It's been a beautiful summer so far, and really getting to enjoy it. Sometimes I do work outside and enjoy just being in the sun, enjoying the weather, and that's what we should be doing this summer, is getting some time outside and not always working, not always by our laptop. I am one who used to take my laptop everywhere, including on holidays, just because these global projects, they can be quite demanding, and I wasn't always felt like I could enforce my boundaries, enforce my time off. And I think these days, since COVID, there's been a sort of shift in culture where we are able to sort of enforce boundaries a bit more, but there's certain environments where it still feels like a struggle. And if you're in that, don't worry, I feel you, I've been there. And that's why we're here to talk about well-being boundaries, so that you can actually have time off this summer and enjoy the sun. So how's everyone feeling today? I know that I'm doing great, but that wasn't always the case. So hope you're doing all right at the very least, if not doing well, and just looking for this as an avenue to get better at enforcing boundaries and getting a bit more time for your well-being. So why do we not enforce boundaries? And that's certainly, for me, I've gone through all of these sorts of situations. Like I said, sort of fear of consequences. That was a big one for me. So I felt like if I said no, then, okay, well, there goes my promotion. There goes future opportunities that this person might offer me. It'll just go to someone else. And also, some people fear their job. That's reality, right? If you stick up for your boundaries, people will think that you're potentially not committed, and if there's layoffs in sight, you'll be the first one to go, and it's a real fear that people have, and I've absolutely been there. Another one is the cultural expectations. And like I said, there's been a shift in the culture, but it certainly still is there. And I was in London finance. This was very extreme, but the expectation was that we would work past 10 p.m., if not midnight, and so on. And if your seniors were there, you were expected to stay there as well. And then also you're expected to stay in on weekends and work from over weekends. So you're expected to answer emails, things like that over the weekends. That was the London culture, the London finance culture. So if you're in there, in that type of situation, I get it. I've been there. I've worked those hours. I've worked 20+ hour days, including weekends. And basically what happened to me was I lost my short-term memory. So it does have an impact on our well-being. And if we don't enforce these boundaries, it will impact us in ways if we don't necessarily faint, like two of my colleagues did. If we still push beyond our limits, it can also impact us, as I said, in other ways. The body lets us know. And so enforcing these boundaries, doing what's actually reasonable, is for our own health. And someone messaged me today, just reminding me that health is so important, and we've got to be grateful for it if we do have it. So the fact that we're here today, we do have a certain amount of health with us, and it's really maintaining that or improving it is important, because if we're not healthy, we can't get the job done. So I've also had experiences where I've been told I was the only one, right? And it was true that I was the only one with experience, but it didn't necessarily mean that I was the only one that had to do the work. There could have been other situations where I could have proposed that someone else does the work, but I can coach them, right? So there are alternatives when you're given these sorts of situations. Another one is their needs are greater than mine. Or their needs are more important than mine. I'm not good enough. And having that type of thinking, it's all or nothing. It's their needs versus mine, rather than the compromises, the alternatives. And that's where the communication of boundaries really is important, I suppose, because typically it's not a win-lose situation, it's a compromise. So it's providing those alternatives is what really can make a difference in the communication and it being better received. And then the other one that I've experienced is, at least myself, and I don't know if you've experienced any others, but trying to figure things out. So I was on this telecom audit, and 10%, less than 10% of the teams, there were over 30 individuals, only 3 members of the team had telecoms experience or telecom audit experience. And so the strain that put on others where they'd ask for coaching, not get coaching. I was one of those individuals. No one could tell me how to audit a particular thing. And so you're just trying to figure things out. And you've got all this pressure saying, why isn't it done? Why isn't it done? Well, I'm trying to figure it out, right? So you can push your hours, your boundaries because you're not getting the support that you need. And so these are common situation or examples that I've actually experienced in my career. And I've had a nearly 20-year career in the corporate space. So I've seen it all. I've been in various countries. I've been in Canada. I've worked in the UK, for instance. So, and then other countries as well. And these are the types of situations that come up. And I think it's important to highlight that 60% of us are actually struggling with boundaries. And that is a high number, especially in the corporate space. So 60% of us, we're in the majority. Most of us are actually struggling with well-being boundaries, not getting the time we need in order to actually switch off. And then also the reason why that's important is because that means there's a 40% increased risk of burnout that's coming from the research itself. 40% is significant. And what we're doing is because we can't switch off, we can't reinforce our boundaries, or we don't feel like we can, it's increasing our risk of burnout significantly. So that is why we do need to do something about this. That's why we're here to talk about well-being boundaries on this beautiful day. And I do appreciate the reasons why we might not feel like we can enforce the boundaries. But what we're talking about today are practical coping strategies. So we're not talking about the root causes and solving those fears. That will be another session. So talking about the fear of consequence and things like that, that's another session. What this session is about is strategies in the moment. That can really help us enforce those boundaries within the moment. So it's not to dismiss those fears because I do appreciate them. I've actually had them myself. But what can we do in the meantime until we've actually been able to deal with those fears? And so the 3 areas that we're going to talk about today are the first being time boundaries. So time boundaries are critical because we need to be able to focus to achieve our goals, not just everyone else's. They're the foundation of our well-being because if we don't get the time to switch off, we're not going to be then fresh the next day in order to be able to focus, in order to be able to do the tasks we need to do. So this is really important. And the workload boundaries, that's the second point here. And that is also critical because companies will take advantage of us. People will take advantage of us. If we can't say no, it'll just keep coming. So the third element here is, of course, the communication of boundaries. So how can we best communicate our boundaries such that we maintain the relationships within the corporate space? Because that is also very key. The workspace, in order to move up, you've got to be able to maintain that good rapport with individuals. I have not always done it the right way, and that has been, no consequence to myself and my career. So if we can communicate our boundaries in the right way, it'll be better received, and it'll sort of get rid of those fears or dampen those fears that we might have of consequences. So let's get into the first one. Are you excited to hear this? Like, is this going to be really helpful for you and is this what you want to hear today? So let's get into it. And the first one, like I said, time boundaries. So what are some sort of time boundaries that we consider? I've got on there, define the needs, focus blocks, and of course, communication. We'll get to communication later on and really truly focus on defining the needs and the focus blocks. So what does this mean? This means, I suppose, defining the needs, not just our own needs, which are important, but also the needs of the project, the needs of the other individual, the needs of our stakeholders. So defining your needs. Do you know what you need? Because sometimes we feel like, especially when we feel overwhelmed or when I felt overwhelmed, it's like, I just don't even know what I need. I just need time off in order to be able to figure it out because everything's just been coming at me at once. I just don't know. I can't answer what I exactly need. And sometimes we just need that space in order to be able to come up with what we actually need in the sustainable period going forwards. So defining our needs, and our needs could also relate to having a clear understanding of our vision and our goals. So if you haven't done that already, check out our Spark Speaker series because there's one where we go through a meditation and soul purpose that is all about defining your purpose, defining what your vision looks like. And so if you have not gone through that, certainly do. We also have other guidance on our website with regards to creating your vision. So it's really about when you take a look at your vision, what do you need presently in order to be able to make that vision a reality? Sometimes that means time off, whether that's just for relaxing, whether that's for meditation. And sometimes that means time in order to pursue an element of your vision. So perhaps relationships. Relationships are the key part of the vision. You might need that time with family and friends in order to develop that. So it's not canceling those plans. So understanding what your needs are very important. And then also on the other side, the flip side, is understanding the stakeholders' needs. So when we communicate our boundaries, understanding what the other person, what's important to the other person, why they're asking you to do this task, why that task is important, is so critical with regards to our communication. And if you don't know why that is, it's certainly an opportunity to ask. Why is this particular task important to you? And then, of course, this second element that's important for time boundaries is those focus blocks. So in order to actually move the needle forwards towards your vision, your goals, you do need time to focus. And research has found that we actually only have 5 hours of true focus each day. And that is shocking because I thought it would be more, but on average, that's what the research shows. I know, can you believe this? It's a bit of a shock. And I think when you realize you only have 5 hours of focus, what truly needs your attention? And of those 5 hours, there's only actually 2 hours of true deep focus. So if you really need to get through an analysis, if you really need to get through something, you've got 2 hours each day to do it. So find out where those blocks of time are within your day and protect those timings. So not necessarily have meetings within those times and not necessarily doing activities that don't need that hyper focus within those 2 hours, for instance. So understanding where your focus blocks are, protecting those, and putting what's actually a priority for you into those times. So that is with regards to time boundaries. Communication of time boundaries is also very important. A few phrases that you can use. Here are some examples. When you can be specific, that's always great. But sometimes it's good also not necessarily to be specific up front unless they do a follow-up, right? You're going to have some people that are going to dig and pry and basically say, well, especially if they're lawyers, why can't you help me at that time? And so having a response to that, we do work through that with our Clarity Under Pressure series. So if that's something that you are interested in, we've got an entire module on communication and influence. And within that, we do talk about boundaries. So, and a couple of examples are, I would love to support you on that call. I'm not able to do that time because that's in my focus block. But could we do an hour earlier or an hour later? So you're not saying a complete no. You're acknowledging that you would love to help them, but that particular time is not available. Another one is this new client is important to the firm. I do respect that. I do realize that I'm not able to do that work tonight as I already have another commitment. You don't necessarily need to specify the commitment, but it depends on your relationship. You might want to specify if you need, if it's time that you already committed to a dinner with family, and it's important that you keep with your commitments because when you commit even to the stakeholder, you follow through, and that's just who you are. So, but I can start this first thing tomorrow as I appreciate the importance of this task. I can move everything else aside tomorrow and prioritize this particular item. So it's recognizing the importance of that task, giving them a new timeline option, but basically saying, tonight I'm not able to do it. The other one that we've got here is I've been working a lot. I need the weekend to come back fresh and focused on Monday. Is there something preventing this from being a Monday item? So this is showing the curiosity, trying to get that understanding as to why this person feels that this is an emergency for the weekend. Once we get that particular information, we might be able to sort of provide an alternative. So certainly something that we can try. Is this something that you can try this week? And once again, there are alternatives to this, and certainly give them a shot this week. So the next one, before I get to the next one, like I said, the time boundaries. First of all, define your needs and theirs. So define the needs. Then it's the focus blocks. Making sure that you do protect that time, and making sure that you get time as well to focus on what's actually a priority for you, what's going to give you satisfaction for your needs. And then the last one is the communication, and some examples there, but we will get to that in the third point here. So the next one is workload boundaries. So what are the workload boundaries? We've got them here. If I can move my. And so workload boundaries, we've got first timing, then scope, and communication. So those are the three key elements with regards to workload boundaries. And so communication, like I said, we're going to get that as the third point. So I'm leaving you in suspense, I know. But the first one is timing and the other one is scope. So these are just examples. When it comes to these two elements in terms of timing and scope, it's about providing alternatives. And for workload boundaries, it's so important to really set these, and I know it's difficult to set them. I did not set them, and I ended up being the joke of the partners. They certainly joked that they were going to have to replace me with 5 people. So if we don't set these workload boundaries, the firm and the individuals, it's just natural that they'll just push more and more on your plate until you say no or break. So, and if you want to avoid burnout, certainly enforce these workload boundaries. And how you can do that is through timing and scope alternatives. So let's jump into a few examples of things that you can say. And like I said, these are just examples. There's more specific examples provided in our Clarity Under Pressure series. So certainly do check that out. The first one here is my portfolio is full at the moment. So what can I deprioritize to take this on? So This is including the what question rather than can I deprioritize something, almost asking permission. This is specify something I can take out of my portfolio rather than can I have your permission to take something out of my portfolio? So just that one word changes the emphasis, and it can completely change the response that you get. And this is something that I didn't necessarily do, as you can tell, because I took on the workload of 5 people. But it's having the mindset of one in, one out. So not taking on the pressure of the understaffed projects, not taking the pressure of those unrealistic timelines. And for the latter, it's like, we can use this, for instance, sounds like a really interesting project, and I appreciate the importance of this new client. The project, as you've outlined it, sounds like it would take about 100 hours. In order to meet the deadline of this Friday, what can we do scope? Alternatively, if the client would accept an early draft with a final version at the end of the month. So it's providing alternatives. This is 2 certain alternatives. It's providing an early draft and then a final draft. So a bit of a change in timing, as well as what can we de-scope? So often it's not a manager's first go-to to de-scope items or negotiate the scope of particular projects. Typically they sort of they are keen to accept this client, this new client is very important, and so they just want to appease them. They just want to say, yep, we can do all of that and overpromise. But you don't want to be an individual who overpromises and underdelivers. You want that reputation of delivering upon what you commit to. So the next one here is, I would love to help. I'm currently working on 2 other priorities which have deadlines this week. As a result, I will not be able to help on this task until next week. Once again, this is not a straight no. It is, I would love to help. There's just a couple of other priorities that I've committed to this week. I'm going to follow through on those commitments, and I'll be available to help next week. So it's just reframing the expectations of others, and that is certainly something that has worked for me in the past. I didn't necessarily use it as often as I should have, but it's something that truly does work in these high pressures, high stakes environments. And I've also been a manager, a senior manager director, who's actually gone back to the client to de-scope because it's just going to be too overwhelming for the team. And when we've broken it down, looked at what resourcing we could get, we were limited. And so I did actually negotiate the timings as well as the scope with clients. Now, I do have to say it's not always an easy discussion. And so many people in the manager level do not necessarily want to have that. So they're not going to offer that straight up. So it's almost like you've got to push for it. And it's okay to push for it. It's what is realistic. So don't feel like you're having to, you feel guilty about it. It's something that's realistic and they should be doing. So workload boundaries, it's providing the alternatives. So from a timing and scope perspective are things that help. And why that's important is because you don't necessarily want to take on the workload of 5 people. Don't end up like I did, burnt out, doing the workload of others, sort of taking on the work of understaffed projects, taking on the work of unrealistic deadlines. This is how you can manage that. So certainly something that helps. And as I was alluding to before, the important thing with regards to these coping strategies is the communication. And that's where sometimes we can struggle with this. So what do we need to know about communication? And just a second here, we've got for boundaries communication, it's being proactive. It is the 3A approach, so AAA approach, and it is the shared or system problem. So what does all of that mean? So the proactive, the AAA approach, and the shared system or the shared problem or system issue. So I certainly have come across challenges with regards to trying to get my communication or get the boundaries reinforced, because I've had responses where just do it, or complete shutdowns. But it's not talking about those instances. There are going to be those instances, but for the most part, there are opportunities to negotiate time boundaries and workload boundaries, especially after COVID. There's a bit more openness to this negotiation, and I call it sort of a negotiation, as I've sort of alluded to, is providing alternatives, which is sort of, yes, you would love to do it, but not necessarily at this timing, not necessarily with this scope, for instance. So communication of boundaries, being proactive. So the key thing here is managing the stakeholders. The stakeholders, no one wants surprises at the end. So, and you also want to have a reputation of delivering what you commit to. So in order to do that, it's that upfront communication of these boundaries, and just also calling it out, having that quick assessment of, actually, that project sounds like it's going to take 100 hours or more time than I actually have to be able to do it. And so it's actually having those upfront discussions such that the stakeholder, for instance, your manager, can then bring in other resources if need be, or have that conversation with the client to de-scope or change the timing before it comes up to the deadline and they basically say, oh yeah, we're not going to deliver today. Because that is never a great discussion to have. It has happened in the past, but it's not something that shows, it doesn't make them look good. And of course, in order to manage your relationships with stakeholders, you want them to look good, right? So it's having that proactive conversation with your manager or your boss in order to be able to actually communicate these boundaries. The next one is the 3A or the AAA approach. And if you took a glance at the slide, you would be able to see that quickly. It is the acknowledge, the appreciate, and the alternatives. So acknowledge the importance of the project, because everyone wants to feel valued. And so if you sort of dismiss the task like it's not important, it's not going to be received well by the other person, because they only come and ask for help if it's important to them, right? So everyone wants to feel valued, and so it's important to acknowledge the importance of the task, acknowledge that you would love to do it, for instance, or it's an interesting project or something about the task. I definitely acknowledge it, and it's not being dismissive of the project or the task. The next element is being appreciative. So, one of the fears I had was the fear of consequence. So the fear of lost opportunities if I say no, or the fear of the lost promotion, or the fear of job loss if I say no. Well, this is what's really important about the AAA approach. So it's being appreciative. And if you show that appreciation, saying no, thank you for the opportunity, I would love the opportunity to do this, it then is more likely that they'll approach you with future opportunities. So showing that appreciation for the opportunity and the task, them coming to you, them acknowledging your experience, or acknowledging that you might be a good fit for this particular project, or it might help you with regards to your promotion. That appreciation, that thoughtfulness that they might have had is important to recognize. So definitely within the communication, show that appreciation in order to maintain that good rapport with the individual. And then the last one here is the alternatives. So I did mention how to create those alternatives. So it's sort of the scope, the timing are two key elements that you can talk about with regards to alternatives. And it's not necessarily conversations that management level like to have with clients. And so it's something that we sort of almost need to propose. to others. So I know that we're coming up to time here, but the last element is the system or the shared problem. And of course, with shared system, the system or the shared problem, this, the workload, the understaffed project, the unrealistic timelines, that is not your problem. So don't feel guilty about setting these boundaries. That is a system problem. It's the firm problem that they don't have enough staff for this project. It's a firm problem that they've agreed to a particular timeline with the client. That's unrealistic. It's not your problem. And so, when in communication about it, make it a problem on the table. So, it's not your personal problem. You're not able to take this on because you've got are at full capacity, but you do appreciate the firm has this problem, and you'll help out in the way that you can. And the way that you can is providing those alternatives. So certainly with this communication of the boundaries, it's really important. It is the being proactive. It is the AAA approach and the system or the shared problem. So that is what's critical about boundaries, coping with boundaries in the moment. If you are interested in more day one relief, we certainly have more for you. So our Spark Speaker Series, this is where if you're dealing with that anxiety, if you're dealing with low energy, so anxiety can come up in multiple ways, whether it's perfectionism, trying to perfect a certain document, even these presentations, if I'm trying to perfect them, or overthinking a conversation or over preparing for a conversation. That is all anxiety showing up in different ways. Embracing change. So we're in an environment where there's so much change with technology and everything like that that's coming along. Embracing that. So how do we do that? That's linked to anxiety, but it takes it one step further. And then we've got relationships. Like I said, the corporate world is about relationships. How do you maintain that good rapport without giving up your well-being? And that's what we discussed a bit here today, some of the coping mechanisms, but there's more to it. You have to deal with toxic situations. And that is what's covered in that Managing Relationships series. So we talked to a trauma expert in that session. So if you're dealing with toxicity, that's certainly one for you. And then the Connected But Alone is another example of the Spark Speaker Series. That is if you can't switch off. That is the digital detox. So we feel lonely, we feel unsupported, and we don't have to navigate alone. You can certainly join our community and get access to all of these resources available to you. So if you need that day one support, we are here for you. And if you want to take it one step further, we have, if you want to level up, if you want to get that promotion, if you want to accelerate your career, if you truly want to survive, not just survive, this is for you. It's our Clarity Under Pressure series. It's our course that covers communication and influence. Like I said, how you frame the boundaries communication is so important. It can change a no to a yes. And influence is certainly impacted by emotional intelligence. So, do you understand, that decisions are emotional decisions? So, if you just think about it, take a step back and think, when you're sad, what typical decisions, what typical actions, what typical behaviors do you do? And it's typically ones that are for safety, for comfort, right? If you're angry, you want action. You're going to move. You're going to do something that's different. So just understanding that decisions are based on emotions, and we tackle all of that within that module of emotional intelligence. Understanding the room, being able to influence the room through emotions is critical for more and more critical for your career. And then we also cover off identity and resilience. So work consumed my life. Like I mentioned before, I worked those 20-hour days and on weekends, and it took my work laptop, on holidays, things like that. And so how I introduce myself related to work. But that can always, as people have understood with layoffs and things like that, that identity then can be shattered. It can bring us right down when we lose our job, right? So it's a matter of having an identity that's separate, that can't be shaken. And that's what that module is. It's also about rapid recovery when we receive a setback or a negative situation. How do we bounce back faster than ever? And then, of course, taking it to another level. Those are the foundations, but taking it to a next level and really getting that competitive advantage is focus with intention, because there are so many distractions in the day. I struggle with this even to today with regards to distractions. I do get distracted, but it's a matter of getting back on track. What are the anchors that will pull you back? How can we get to that deep focus? I did mention some of the research today that is coming from that module of focus with intention. So if you like that, if you want more on that, this module is for you. We dive into how to take advantage of the time that we have. And then lastly, with regards to the Clarity Under Pressure series, it's the decisions with uncertainty or ambiguity. So in today's world, we're making more decisions with less information or too much information. We just don't know which direction to go. And it's that anxiety, it's that fear of, are we making the right decision? It doesn't actually matter. And we'll get into why in that module. So if you're interested in that, understand why, if you do get a lot of anxiety over decisions and your direction, where you're headed, if you procrastinate a lot on the most important tasks, this module's for you. The decisions with uncertainty or ambiguity, that is for you. So if you want this series, take advantage of the July discount. Is 40% off. The discount code is Clarity, capital letters, Clarity. So 40% off just for today and tomorrow. So do take advantage of that action now if you want to really move your, career forward. And of course, thank you for joining this live stream today. If you want to invest in yourself, if you want to actually make 2026 count, do take advantage of that discount, because we're almost halfway through. We're actually over halfway through. We're at the end of July. We're halfway through 2026. So how do you want to actually count? Do you want 2026 to look the same as 2025? I think not. You actually want to transform and make the life you actually want. So where do you want to be for 2027? Do you want that promotion, that work-life balance? What do you want? Do you want those deeper connections, that relationship? What do you want? Where do you want to go? So if you don't have that vision, certainly create that vision, and we can help you on that with our resources available. But definitely, if you're going to live 100 years, don't live the same year 100 times. And as Warren Buffett once said, invest in yourself. So this is an opportunity to invest in yourself, because it's the best investment you'll ever make. It'll pay off the rest of your life. So it's an opportunity to invest in yourself. We've got day one relief if you're feeling like, you're just not up for it today. Check out our Spark Speaker series. That will just help you re-energize for the day, get you back to being where you need to be, give you that energy to then take the next step with our Clarity Under Speaker series. Clarity Under Pressure series or course, which if you do that today or tomorrow, you get that 40% discount. So do take advantage of that. And if you don't invest in yourself, you will lose out on the results that you want, the happier life, the improved well-being, that promotion. So do take advantage of that today. That 40% discount is a July discount. So we're at the end of July. Do take advantage of that. And it's important to know that if you take just one step forward, that's all you need to do, is just every day take one step forward. Because if you don't take advantage of that and invest in yourself, you're going to be focused on other people's goals, other people's urgencies and needs. Which I certainly was. I was caught up in the firm's needs, doing what's right for the firm, but then losing sight of what was actually going to move me towards my vision. So control your destiny, or someone else will. The choice is yours. So do you want to be working for everyone else and their goals, or do you want to be focused on your own? And this is an opportunity to focus on your own. So sign up for our school community where you have a whole bunch of resources, like I said, with the Spark Speaker Series, if you need that day one relief, or take advantage of that Clarity Under Pressure discount, that 40% discount. The discount code is Clarity, capital letters. And stay tuned here for our next live stream. Our next live stream is on Tuesday. So certainly do that. Thank you for joining for today, and hope you have a great Thursday. And it's a fabulous Thursday, fabulous and sunny. Hopefully you can implement some of these boundaries today. Were they powerful for you? I think I was talking quite quickly, so hopefully you caught some of those. But the key messages with you today, let me just go through them very quickly. It is the time boundaries. Define your needs, focus blocks, and communication. The workload boundaries, alternatives, so that can either be timing or scope, and communication. And of course, with both time and workload boundaries, like I said, it's the communication, the boundaries that makes a difference. It can turn a no to a yes. And that is being proactive. That's using the triple A approach, which is acknowledge, appreciate, and alternatives. And then, of course, put it on the table. It's not your problem. It's a system or shared problem. So was that powerful? Absolutely. Just put one thing in for this week, just creating those boundaries. Have a weekend this weekend. It's a long weekend. Put those boundaries in. It's a long weekend here in Vancouver. It might not necessarily be a long weekend where you are, but certainly put those boundaries in for this weekend so that you can enjoy this summer. This is for you. Thank you for joining, and see you next Tuesday on the flip side of this weekend.